Hello, everyone. My name is Arten Tierboff. Throughout the course, Perspective in the World Christian Movement, I have learned a lot. Out of the multiple chapters in the book, 10 of them have stood out to me as extra profound, encouraging, or extra useful to someone in a missionary situation. The first chapter is chapter 1. It's titled The Living God is a Missionary God, and it's by John R.W. Stott. This chapter really stood out to me because it shows how our God is a God of missions. It details the story of Abraham and the promises God made and fulfilled to him. Mr. Stott, the guy who wrote this chapter, he starts first with the call of Abraham, and then he goes through all the way to Jesus. And of course, Jesus is the person by whom all the world nations would be blessed. So it shows the prophecies of Jesus and just how God works through missions and how God was working through missions even back then. The second chapter is chapter 8. This chapter is called The Story of His Glory, and it was written by Stephen C. Hawthorne. The chapter shows how God uses the events of the Exodus to glorify himself and show people that he is the one true God above all the other gods. Of course, more specifically, this chapter, when God glorified himself in the Exodus, it was, of course, showing himself superior to the gods of the Egyptians. But one of the most profound things about this chapter is how it shows how God moves in our lives and how he works things together for good. When we worship God, he is able to bestow his full amount of splendor and love upon us. So this chapter, it really showed how God works in our lives and how he loves us, and that's one of the reasons why it stood out to me. This next chapter, the third chapter that really stood up to me was chapter 16, and it was by Gregory A. Boyd and was titled God at War. This chapter really dealt with spiritual warfare and the struggle between God and Satan that has been raging throughout eternity. And this chapter shows how Satan is the god of this world and how he controls and puppets his followers. It also shows how when we become Christians, we are freed from the bonds of Satan and his demonic powers. And of course, this was greatly represented in the healings Jesus performed. And that chapter really stood out for me, and it'd be really useful to somebody in a missionary situation because, of course, spiritual warfare is an everyday part of our lives, but it seems to be extra prevalent in a foreign missionary culture. The fifth chapter, chapter 27 of the book, Perspective in the World Christian Movement, is by David Wells and is titled Prayer, Rebelling Against the Status Quo. And this chapter, of course, deals with prayer, as the title says, and it really showed me how powerful prayer is, and it, of course, prayer is such a powerful weapon, and this chapter just showed people how wonderful prayer is, and it shows also how a lot of Christians don't use prayer enough in their prayer lives, and it also went through the story of the woman who prevails because he constantly is going to a judge to ask for him for something. And the chapter says this is how we should be with our prayer life. It says that we should just keep on petitioning God for the things that we need. And then, of course, the sixth chapter that really stood out to me is chapter 34. This chapter is by Robert Coleman. It is titled The Hope of the Coming World Revival. This chapter covers excitement, of course, over a prophecy that one day every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And this chapter really stood out to me because it shows that one day everybody will convincingly believe in Jesus, which is very interesting to me, and it really is very encouraging to somebody who is trying to be a missionary. The seventh chapter is chapter 40, and it is titled "Missionary Societies and the Fortunate Subversion of the Church." This chapter basically deals with mission societies and the formation of mission societies, and I thought it was very interesting. It would be very useful to a missionary to know how the mission societies were formed. The eighth chapter is chapter 60 of the book Perspective in the World Christian Movement. It is by Patrick Johnstone and is entitled Expecting a Harvest. Of course, this chapter covers the growth of evangelical Christianity and the expectation that more and more people will convert to evangelical Christianity in the future. And I thought that this chapter would be very useful to somebody in a missionary setting because it shows how, of course, it shows the history of evangelicals and the history of ministry. The ninth chapter is chapter 64 of the book Perspective in the World Christian Movement, and it is titled Cultural Worldview and Contextualization. And this chapter deals with contextualization, as the title implies. And this is a very sensitive subject for a lot of people, but it's very useful to learn because contextualization basically is the taking of a gospel to another culture. And so, like, sometimes what we'll do in Western cultures, we'll kind of bind our culture to the gospel, but you don't really want to do that. You want people to be able to understand the gospel in their culture, and to not have stuff that might be tied on by culture to the gospel. So you just want to give them the pure gospel. You just want to take the pure gospel to people. That way they don't think that they have to. That way they don't think that they have that, like, part of someone's culture is based on whether they're saved or not. And then, of course, the 10th and final chapter is called Finding a Place in Serving Movements Within Society. The chapter covers different categories of cultures and societies, and this is good because it covers stuff such as social class systems within societies and the challenges that a missionary might face when going to these cultures. This would be very useful to somebody in a missionary situation, especially if they're going to a caste-based society such as India, where it's very useful to know how you need to deal with the caste system and how you need to witness to somebody who's in one caste and how the people in the higher caste might react to that. So that's very useful for a missionary to learn. All in all, I've learned a lot from this class. I'm very thankful for this class because it's taught me a lot, and I'm hoping that I will definitely be able to use the stuff I've learned in this class in a missionary setting when I go to the mission field. Thank you. Have a good day. God bless you.